Good evening, everybody. Welcome for this evening's talk with us. This is going to be our second part to this chat with Simon Panos. We're going to enjoy talking about monitor land, more technical stuff than last time. We've got some good questions that we're going to cover for tonight. And then tonight's also going to be our giveaway. For those of you that remember, if you watched part one on YouTube and commented on there and subscribed, you're going to be in a draw, which is currently happening in the background. It's going to be verified with our friends at Waldemar so that we can announce the winner towards the end of the show. But for now, let's say hello to Simon. Thanks for joining us again tonight.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to episode 15, I believe.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
Pleasure, man. It's great. We've had some great feedback on the previous ep, and I think it just stirred a lot of conversation points. We got a little bit off topic. Well, we stayed on topic. We just expanded on stuff that we didn't expect to expand on too much. We got into technical riders quite a bit. That actually brought up something that came out in a couple of comments where we are actually going to do an episode specifically on, things and how to look at technical riders, because there's some good talking points about that. I mean, from our perspective, the technical element obviously is big, but a technical rider from a band perspective has got a lot of elements in it, which has got to cater for all aspects of the band in that context, whether it be backstage, on stage, catering, travel, accommodation, all that kind of stuff can be in the document like that. But for tonight, we're doing monitor land. Before we get into answering some of the questions, I want to ask Simon I'm going to ask a couple of questions, obviously, and then give Simon an opportunity to get into some of the technical. So last time we spoke about communication. We spoke about the bigger setup, the bigger overview. We spoke a lot about communication, band, feedback. We had some questions on personal monitoring and all that kind of stuff. But when we come down to you as a monitor engineer itself, standing at the console, you've done your prep, you're at the show, you're in show mode. There's obviously, never mind, the one question that'll always come up is, what's your favorite console? And you need context for some of those questions, but how would you answer that question?
Okay, well, like most things, the console is ultimately just a tool. It's not the be-all and end-all. It doesn't make or break the show. The console that you choose is very much dictated to you by the needs for that particular show. How many wedge sends, how many in-ear sends, how many effects sends do you need? Are you supplying signal to personal monitoring systems? If so, are you doing it at Dante, Maddie? There's a lot of things that come into play here when you trying to pick a console. A lot of times you don't get a choice. Let's face it. You get booked. Someone's gone, we've quoted for this, and you have to make it work. Personally, at the moment, my favorite consoles are the Digico SD range and the Avid S6L. The Avid S6L is becoming, it's a new, for me, as a monitor engineer, it's a newer toy. I'm not massively familiar with it, but I've become more comfortable with it in the last 6 months. And as you are one of the few people with one here, so I was very comfortable. I love the old profile. It's one of my favorite consoles for mixing in-ears is the old profile. Very familiar with the layout. The new S6L has got obviously the background. The firmware it's running looks almost exactly the same.
Yeah, it's a carry forward. Yeah,
it's a new surface, and there's a new way of thinking. There's a new way of laying things out. It takes a while to get used to, but it does sound amazing. I'll give it that. And then the Digico SD range I love because it's got a few unusual functions. I mean, the macro section on a SD range, I love because you can do just about anything at a button push. If you can think of it, you can do it.
Yeah.
And the SD also has the the Digicos have a nice function, which was particularly handy on the voice, which maybe you can correct me on it. I don't know if the SXL does it, but on the Digico SD range, you can send groups to auxiliaries, which is a strange. I mean, most consoles will give you buses, and you can send a group or an auxiliary to a matrix.
Yes.
But you wouldn't necessarily be able to send a group to an auxiliary.
Yeah.
Which is
it's unique.
It takes a while to get your head around it. But if you've got something like say you want to do a drum compression group for in-ears, or you want to do, say you've got a lot of background vocals or a choir, and you want to group them for, say you want to have your baritones, altos, sopranos, tenors in four groups, and you want to be able to have a group compressor across each group, just to keep them all sitting together nicely. The SD range then gives you the option of dialing those groups into aux sends. So instead of having to put in 36 microphones or whatever it is into each in-ear mix, you only have to do 4 sends. So that is one of the nice functions that I like about the SD.
Yeah. Look, the nice thing is what I found with consoles is they all coin phrases like macro functions and pop-up groups with Midas. And what S6L have now launched in the last couple of upgrades, which have been phenomenal, is they've expanded their control section. And they just call it control, and they've got 128 function switches, which can, again, you can make every switch do what you can think of doing, and it's a different way of getting to similar results, but they take feedback from people, and I like the high-end brands. They take comments from engineers in the field and what guys like to do and what they don't like to do and what worked on this and what didn't work on that. You made the comment about the old profile, and moving across to the S6L, the control surface is completely new, but then you've got that comfort where the screen might be in a dark mode, but it looks, and you got a feel of it very quickly, and it's the same thing with the SD range. As they're progressing, they're keeping those feels and those things in there, because they know what the users like. Okay, so you didn't answer my question, which is what we always do. You don't have a favorite console. And I think, no. but you didn't answer it in the right way, because I do the same thing. People often ask me, what's your favorite PA? I said, well, what am I doing? You have to context, because if I don't have a choice, if I'm doing orchestral and you give me a Maya ML4 system, I'm going to have to work in getting that PA nice and sweet, because it's not designed for that. It's, 800 into a horn for violins is quite a challenge. So it's based on knowing the tools, knowing what they're doing, and being able to apply that. If you get booked by a company and they own an SD, you're going to get an SD. And most companies, they also know the guys that are running the shows these days and doing the production design and the production managers. If you think about Jaco at Gearhouse and Adrian at Multimedia and all that, when they look at a show, there's an M7, for example, in the warehouse, and it's a 96-channel orchestra gig. They'll know not to put that on monitors, because it doesn't fit the brief of the show. Nothing wrong with the console, doesn't fit into that mode. And I appreciate that from guys when they think about shows like that. So coming back to you as an engineer, you're standing behind a console, you've had a chance to set it up. What are some of you talked about macros or control functions or anything like that. What are some of those macros? What are some of the quick button access things that you as an engineer want at your fingertips?
Okay, well, I want to have a tap tempo. I want to have one I found very handy is if you have a spare set of in-ears, I like setting up a macro that will allow you to, at the push of a button, send whichever mix has got a problem. Say someone's pack starts dropping out, and you need to get something. You can take a pack out to them, but you don't know if it's the RF. If the RF is the problem, something's intruding on that frequency.
Yeah, so if you just
rescan
a
spare
pack,
is not going to do anything. But if you've got 6 sets of in-ears on stage and you've got number 7 and 8 is going spare, I set up a shortcut key to route at the touch of a button, whichever mix. So I can set it up to be route mix 1 to outputs 15, 16. That's one of the ones I like to do. Mute groups, effects, a mute group just to mute effects, vocal effects between songs. Because with in-ears, last time someone wants to finish a song and they've still got a delay going or a huge reverb.
Or wash reverb or something. Yeah,
it's it all depends on your personal tastes, what you want to accomplish, really.
Okay, well that brings me.
I like having shortcuts to all my graphic EQs.
So I want to interfere with what you just said there quickly. Personal taste. So there's a couple of schools of thoughts. Obviously, when you're a monitor engineer, you've got 10 musicians on stage. How much personal choice or personal influence can you have in those mixes? You're facilitating the drummer, the vocalist, the guitarist, and all that. So, when it comes to EQing or when it comes to, what you think a blend would be, how do you balance between what you think is right and what the musician's asking for?
Again, that comes down to experience. That comes down to, I used to be a musician, not a very good one, but I had a basic idea of what I wanted to hear when I was in a band. And then now after 20 something years of doing it, you learn to approximate. If the bass player is standing next to the drummer, he's probably not going to want to have cymbals in his mix. You have to just understand what the musician, their basic needs, what it is they're going to need to work off of. It's a
yeah. I get what you're saying. What I'm getting at, because when I've spoken to young guys, if you're a monitor engineer, probably one of the worst things you can do is when a vocalist turns to you and says, "Listen, I want some reverb in my ears." And you go, "No, this is monitors. We don't do effects." Or no, I've EQ'd it. It sounds fine. You're laughing because it's a. And I think you're answering it, but I want you to answer it from that perspective.
Okay. This is now I think there's been some bad habits have been taught over the years to people as they are coming up. We spoke about this last time, that monitors is like the poor relation to front of house. Everyone's feels like they have to do monitors to get to front of house, and it's you can't view it that way. It's not applicable in the 21st century. It's a specialist. Yes, it's a specialist position. You have to take care of the artist. The artists need you to accommodate them. In order for them to perform at their best, they need to feel like you got their back. You are supporting them, not hindering them. Otherwise, you end up in a situation where the singer loses confidence and they're not performing how they want. The crowd are like, there's 1,000 people watching and they're going, "Oh, we really like this band, but they were rubbish tonight."
Yeah.
You've got to have, if the singer wants reverb, give the singer reverb. If you have limited sends, it happens. If you have an LS9 and you've got, or something smaller even, you've got to figure out, does the drummer need a stereo in-ear mix? Can I pull back one of those auxes there and use that as a dedicated reverb for the singer? To a certain degree, you've got to massage egos. You can't just go, "No, you're not getting it." It's about compromising. You really have to do the best you can, because in the end, they are the people that you are working for. If you want them to come back and go like, "Hey man, we had a really good show. Are you available next week?"
Yeah.
You can't sit there with a every time they look over at you, you may as well just put up a stop sign. It's not gonna do anyone any favors.
Yeah.
It's not going to help the performance, and it's not going to help you with future employment.
Okay, so let me ask you this question. On one of those consoles where you're compromised and the lead vocalist says, "Can I have some reverb?" Would you insert?
Yes. If you run out of auxes, use the insert point. Just remember to, before you start dialing it in, first thing you do
Go
before you
full
even
dry.
insert it, go to the wet and dry control and turn it down to 0 before you insert it. Then quickly dial in a quick reverb like a plate. I tend to go with vocals. I tend to go with a plate. Dial in the time, dial in all that, then slowly bring it in. I normally end up around about 20%.
Yeah, between
But, yeah.
14, 20, depending on what you're on.
Where there's a will, there's a way. You can definitely
Yeah,
find. This is also assuming you have a digital console
correct.
and you're not limited by an analog setup that only has 2-3 effects and a certain number of compressors, etc.
Yeah.
But yes.
Okay. So let's talk about in that scenario, if we're not running ears, we're running wedges. What's your feeling about
Okay.
using effects on wedges?
Nothing wrong with it. There's nothing wrong with it, but okay, this is something I want to touch on about clarity in wedges. So wedges are at most a biamp system, at best a biamp system. Function 1 released a triamp wedge a while ago, but it obviously didn't take off because nobody can afford to have 3 channels of amplifier on 1 wedge send. So wedges are not as high fidelity as, say, a 3 or 4-way front of house rig. So the one way you can get effects to cut through better is to utilize your your low pass filtering better, high pass, low pass filtering. There's a lot of things that people let slip. They let slide too easily. They don't pay proper attention to their high and low pass filtering. If you look, for example, at a sax player, say you've put a Beta 98 on the sax player. Now he's got, the Beta 98 frequency response, I think it goes all the way up to about 16K.
16.5, yeah, somewhere there.
And at what point does the frequency response of a sax tail off? 8K maybe? What I find is in something like a sax, you get, the reed vibrates and it's a metal body, so you get some kind of shrill overtones sometimes as well. You don't need that coming out of a wedge. So use your low pass filter, bring it down, bring it right down, get it to about 8K. If you notice, or the sax player notices that it's not some of the clarity starting to dip, bring it back up. But you don't need everything from 10K to 6K, 16K sitting in there. Because say your vocalist then goes, okay, I want the brass section in my front wedges, and you haven't low pass filtered 3 horns. So now you've got a voice and 3 Beta 98s, just, all fighting for that clarity in the top.
And the brass are all standing next to the drum kit.
Yeah, and they've got the cymbals going down there, and you can't. So straight away you've got this fight in the top end. You've got the vocalist. So he's got an SM58, which tails off around about 10K, I think. You've got these horns that are going all the way up to 16K, and then you're trying to put effects in on top of it.
And make
that's
it sizzle.
why people end up, and they're starting to put too much in and it's starting to get roomy. And the more stuff that's going down the mics is coming out the reverb. So you're losing a battle there. So you have to control the tonal aspect on stage. But effects, I've got absolutely no problem with doing it. You have to. Reverbs are essential. People are used to hearing them. Even in a rehearsal room these days, guys can sit there and put as much reverb on as they want. It's about finding a happy medium and controlling everything else, making sure it all sits together nicely. You can't just, if you're using an aux, say you're using one aux to feed a vocal reverb, and you've got your lead vocalist and 3 backing singers and they're all sharing it, and you've only got the backing singers high pass to 80 hertz. and they standing next to the bass player. Well, all that mud is going to be going straight down their mics into the reverb engine and coming out the lead vocalist's wedges. You've got to learn to control things like that. You've got to be smarter about. You can find out a lot about the tools you're using. Look at your microphone polar patterns. Look at their frequency response curves, and just also use common sense. I mean, if you've got a KSM32, for example, on an electric guitar, front of house guys like having a nice large diaphragm condenser on a guitar, and they sound great. I'll give them that. But the KSM32 it's flat all the way up to 20 kilohertz. Do you need that in the wedges? No. I mean, after about 5K, if you're lucky, there's nothing else there. But all that stage noise will be going down that microphone. If you're routing that to other wedges.
Yeah. So coming back to just expand a little bit more on the actual wedge itself. If we have to talk about efficiency, for example, of different wedges, so you get a lot of speakers, manufacturers make very good multi-purpose speakers, plastic boxes, wooden boxes. You get the micro wedges. There's quite a few from DMB, all that. But how important is a good quality wedge, and how does that help? What you were talking about, and use the word fidelity, which I also wanted to bring in, the fidelity of the sound. But because purely, if the wedge is not that good, can't you fix it on the EQ? Why would a cheap monitor, for lack of a better word, be more difficult to put into practice? It's a deep question, I know.
Well, there's a lot of aspects to that. First of all, sound company budgets. In South Africa, a lot of guys will be looking for a box that is a jack of all trades. Something they can throw up on a speaker stand, uses a DJ full, uses a wedge. The problem that tends to happen with something that is a jack of all trades, it's a master of none. So at best, it's a compromise when you use it as a wedge. When it comes to things like bespoke wedges, like the L-Acoustics Hi-Q or the DMB M4, these are all boxes that have had a huge amount of R&D cost in producing them. That's why they are so expensive. The amplifier programs that drive them, are pretty much created in a lab to make sure the speakers are the most efficient they can be. So if you can, obviously the better the wedge, the easier your job is. A lot of boxes also that are multifunction might have strange pre-EQs that don't help you at all. If you've got a box with a front of house and a monitor switch, you've got no idea. If you don't know the box, unless you've got the manual there or the spec sheet, you have no idea what tonal shift you'll get flicking those switches. So for me, having a lower grade, I mean, it happens. You have to. You're never going to get the best gear every show you do. Sorting out a tonal imbalance in a wedge is a hard thing to do, especially when you press for time. Positive EQ on wedges, it's not the best option. Trying to put things in that aren't there is a massive issue for me.
He's frozen.
That's it. You've used before.
Just repeat that last one. You froze for a second.
I froze for a second.
Yeah. So putting in there what it can't do. That's where you froze.
Okay. Positive EQ on a wedge that if it's got a hole in its frequency response, positive EQ is not a good thing really in monitor world, because what you're trying to do is control your frequency. You're trying to eliminate the risk of feedback. And if you are suddenly boosting certain frequencies, you're obviously making the risk of feedback greater by doing that.
So just to explain that,
It's
yeah, just to explain that, what he's talking about, if you've got a monitor that has got an inconsistent frequency response curve, and you can hear that when you play reference music or anything like that, and you notice that the cab is like, sitting around 350 to 400, 500, it's got a bit of a dip, or you hear a noticeable spike at a certain frequency. If you go and counteract that, so if someone is talking on a vocal and you try and counteract that EQ, it's a very unpredictable thing that you're doing, because the DSP that's involved, the level that you're playing at, the dynamic range that it's coming at you at, you think, oh, I remember that he's saying he's not hearing the mids, let me boost 500 because, it's an old wedge. It's not as simple as that, because you do end up shooting yourself in the foot, because you might be boosting 500. The speaker is not doing the 500 the way that you're expecting it to do it. And then your harmonics of that can just jump out and bite you without you even realizing it. So that's sort of where you're coming at. So,
it could be a fault in the box. It could be,
we've lost.
So the cap is gone. What have you lost?
You're starting to become a little bit more robotic. I think the future is catching up with us.
Future is catching up. Okay, let me see something here.
Yeah, it's all those downloads in the background. So
it could be
it could be something. You look good though. I'm going to switch over here to my live cam. Don't worry, I can keep an eye on Simon on the other side. He can hear me, but you guys can't see him now. So I'm going to keep an eye on, and when I see him stabilize, I'll bring him back in. So what he's talking about there is with DSPs and certain monitoring. What I was trying to get at is when you start saturating a monitor, when you have a vocalist and you're working with the vocalist and you're doing your sound check and you get him sounding great, you've got his EQ going, even doing his little bit of reverb there, all that kind of stuff. When you start adding all the other stuff, he's happy, he walks away, he comes back to his wedge after you've done the monitors. Now he's asking for piano, he's asking for guitars, bit of drums, bit of percussion, all that. Then he goes, well, why'd you change my voice? Or he says the inevitable, I can't hear anything. It's screaming loud, but I can't hear. That's when we talk about the efficiency of the monitor having gone out the window, where the speaker can't reproduce accurately what you're throwing at it, either because of you're overdriving it. If you've got no headroom left in the dynamic capability of a speaker, you get to 40, 50, 60% of pushing into it. The minute you go past that, everything else just starts clamping down, whether it be in frequency response, dynamic range. You might have your vocalist happy and then he asks for just a little bit more kick. And if you've gone for the perfect kick drum sound, with a low end, it's a 12-inch wedges, and you're doing 50 hertz boosts because it sounds great on your wedge or on your cans, or the drummer's got a sub next to him, so you've EQ'd it for that. You add that into your vocal wedges, his whole mix can fall apart. Looks like Simon's back to normal. Simon, are you there? There we go.
I've never been very stable anyway, so.
I don't know if you heard what I was just saying. I was just sort of keeping them entertained. But it is, it's a very important thing to understand. And if you are faced with a scenario where, and it comes with time as well, after a while, and I think you can speak to this as well, when you get faced with, MI products on stage, so it's all self-powered 12 inches. There's only so much they can do, as opposed to bi-amped old school PS15s or anything like that. There's definite do's and don'ts when it comes to what you do put in them. So if your main drummer is saying, I want the kick drum thumping through this, what do you do if you've got a 12-inch little monitor?
Well, you see, this is yes, you tell everyone that you've just had a bereavement in the family and you leave. We've all been in that situation where you've got less than ideal monitor speakers, where the driver's got absolutely no excursion whatsoever. The first, you at neg 15 on the fader, sending the kick to it, and it's already starting to hit the grill. What to do in those situations? Well,
so here's a question.
Personally, I don't use much in the way of dynamics. When I'm mixing on high quality wedges, I'll have like a gate on the kick drum. I tend not to compress unless you've really got an animal behind the kit who's like bending the needle back. But one way to try get through it is to put a limiter on that aux send. Say you've got 6 sends of really poor wedges. Figure out at what point is that the trans end of the kick drum, what point is it starting to like make that driver hit max excursion?
Yeah.
Once you get to that point, go 1 dB back and put a compressor on, but set it almost like a limiter. Set it 10-to-1 higher, fast attack. Set it like a limiter. Try protect, because the other thing as well is that, if you've been hired by someone and you destroy all their gear, they're not going to be very pleased with you. You might have trouble getting your invoice paid. So, and then find a different way to control that dynamic. Put a compressor on the kick drum just to take some of the real top end off of it. If you can pull it back 3-4 dB, that's 3-4 dB. You can push the output up to give you that bit more headroom. A bit of push and pull. You've got to find. Sometimes you won't have the time to do it, but you've got to do it as quick as you can. Find the happy balance between the two. Deaf drummers are indeed a problem, but they are much easier to deal with when you have high quality gear. But
it's true. You are talking to the dynamic. A drummer is sitting there hearing it acoustically. When he's playing without ears, without wedges, practicing, he's hearing the full dynamic force of all the instruments around him. When you put him in a situation where he can't get that reproduction, I've seen drummers where they'll moan about the EQ of something, but it's not the EQ. If you listen to the source, it's fine. It's the level they're trying to push out of a wedge that can't do it. Or they've got, if a drummer's got little single cheap drivers, I'm not going to mention names, or even worse, some consumer level pods, there's no ways that you can ever get that guy happy, because the expectation of the technology in his ears is just completely wrong. Now, I'm not saying a drummer has to have full 8-way, 20-way, 50,000 Rand in-ears, but you've got to have something that's made for the context that you're working in, where if you're a musician, if you're a bassist, a drummer, a vocalist, a keyboardist, your position and your scenario demands different stress on gear. So having earpieces that is professional, and when I say professional, it's designed for a live stage environment, which means its impedance matches the packs that we plug it into. Its impedance matches the headphone amplifiers we're using, which means the level is set correctly. And then also it is expecting non-processed music. It's not expecting consumer level production music. It's expecting dynamic fluctuations of at least 15, 18 dB SPL, which is something like a kick drum with the transients that Simon was talking about. So that's just a little side note. If you can buy the latest Samsung or iPhone or whatever and get some earphones and they sound absolutely amazing, and they do for the commercial stuff, but they will not sound like that on a professional stage, or even worse on an amateur stage environment where there isn't all the stuff to deal with it. So that's just the little caveat I wanted to throw in there.
No, exactly.
That question comes up
it's one
a
of
lot.
those things. It's one of those things. I mean, like everyone's like, well, how come my studio monitors sound so good? Why can't we put those on the stage? Different tools for different applications. You're not gonna, you can't. I mean, if there's any musicians listening, I mean, I don't know that there are, but if you're a sound guy who works for a band, one of the best pieces of advice you can give them is to get some custom in-ears done. From a performance point of view, it is life-changing. Generic molds are the problem's in the name. They are generics. They one size fits all. You have a few different size foamies to help it sit in your ear a bit better. But everybody's, no two heads are the same. No two sinus cavities are the same. No two ear canals are the same. For me, personally, I've got quite a hook in my ear canals.
Like a little dog leg.
Yeah, I've got a little dog leg. I'll take out my spare earpiece here quickly and show you. I mean, I don't know if I can get this close enough on the camera, but if you see there...
Oh, my word. That's
I've got quite a bend.
You can park in the handicap zone with that. Sorry.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, if you look at mine, it's
All
pretty
right, Mr.
straight.
Front of house. All right, Mr. Front of house. Okay, shots fired. You want to play that way? I've kept it clean until
No, but
now.
it's true. I mean, I remember talking about generics, and Brendan Ross, I had him on the other night. He was, I remember when we started getting him on in-ears, because he's traveling with Johnny Clegg a lot. We're talking about 7-8 years ago. And Johnny Clegg band, wedges all through, maybe drums on ears, but, it's loud. And him being the saxophonist and walking around stage, wanted to do earplugs and also get on in-ears so that he has, saves his ears a bit. And then we bought him some generics, and we started using generics, but they just never stayed in his ear. And he couldn't get them sitting in. I remember actually once at a gig, he pulled it out and the foamy stayed behind, and you couldn't see it. And I was standing on stage with the Leatherman. This is quite scary, with the Leatherman, and hold your head, don't move, trying to pinch it and pull it out of his ear, which is, I'm not a doctor, famous certain person's line. I'm not a doctor, but trust me. And I got it out, but it's like, and then he actually went and had molds done, and his molds came back exactly the same as yours, but even worse. Longer, but extreme angle, which means a generic, you put the foam on, you push it in, and you actually block it when you get into a certain depth, and then you go and spend money on something, and you don't know why it doesn't work. And it's not comfortable, it hurts, all that. So custom molds really make a massive difference into your experience of the technology.
It's also the isolation you get from them. There's always a certain degree of spill, bleed with generics. The custom in-ear route is definitely the way to go. It's like I say, it's life-changing for musicians. Once they get them, they'll never go back to having a loud wedge blaring at them.
Yeah.
It'll and as long as they have an engineer who knows how to mix ears properly as well.
Yeah.
As long as you get it right. Yeah.
Okay, so then you touched a little bit on dynamic. So on your console, dynamic use on vocals and other acoustic instruments, compression. Should you just compress everything? Should you compress nothing? Do you only compress because someone is clipping? Do you only compress on your masters? Do you only compress how do you feel about dynamic? Because obviously it does have a massive impact on someone with mic technique, for example.
Yeah. So what I'm going to say now is probably controversial, but just because you have a compressor on every channel doesn't mean you have to use it. And I think that's a mistake that a lot of people make. They feel like it's there, I've got to be compressing, I've got to see gain reduction. You don't. It's one of the biggest mistakes you can use. I use dynamics on inputs to control transients, and on outputs, again, also just to avoid damage.
Safety.
Avoid, clipping. I use it like you would, like a touch on a limiter on an amplifier. That's what I use it for. Very loud, there might be a part where everything just kicks in quickly for a second.
Or LTC.
The meat. Well, it normally happens when a front of house guys push the wrong button, or the lighting guy. But so most channels, like vocals, most vocalists are, if they're experienced, they're not going to have any degree of, they've learned how far to pull the mic away. And they can, that's what they're working on. They've got a degree of dynamic control. They know their voice. They know where the microphone must be for them to hear it in the wedges or whatever. So you don't have to, slap a compressor on them and go, right, now I'm, as soon as you get to this point, that's it, you're in the compressor. I compress vocals when I'll listen to the mic and I'll hear where that mic gets too much. And I'll set a compressor roughly there, at that point. And then I listen. And when they do a sound check, if they get the compressor to kick in a couple of times, I can make a call on that, go, yeah, fine. And then, in the show, just watch it, see what it's doing. There's absolutely no need to compress. You don't have to compress everything. The one, there's certain things. Snare drum. I'll stick a compressor on a snare drum because you want to control that. You've got no idea what the drummer's going to do, especially if he's hungover in sound check. He might just be, whatever, sound check. Come the show, he's 6 dB louder. So you set a compressor there as a precaution. Snare bottom, always compress it because I don't want that spike. All I want snare bottom to do is complement. I want the snap of the spring to complement the top skin. Bass guitar, I'll put a compressor on him just at again, follow the vocal example, just at a point where I know if he suddenly does a slap, he's been playing with his fingers, all of a sudden he does a slap, you want to be able to catch that transient. You don't want that because that'll be the point. If you don't catch it, everyone will turn to you and go, bass down.
Yeah.
They don't need the bass down. It was just that one note, that one time. Keyboard players, get them to run through patches.
Exactly.
They might have a couple of nasty patches that jump in level. You've just got to have something. There's
Yeah, I tend to with the keyboard players. I'll run through patches and I'll try and get them and bring to their attention that can we adjust some of those patches, and they're more than happy to help you, because obviously the better they balance themselves out, the more they get featured in the right way. If they've got one keyboard on the side and they only ever use it once in a song, but that once causes you to compress the whole keyboard bus, that's not what you want.
Keyboard bus. Yes, we have those in monitors.
Yeah. Okay, so talking about compression a little bit now, with the bassist, for example, if you compress him, if you're doing it from a safety perspective, chances of him noticing it it's there, it's minimal. But if you're doing, if you're compressing a bass guitar or any instrument, what you would do if you're busy mixing it in front of a house or mixing an album or something, the people on stage are playing to the dynamic that they're feeling. So the idea with compression is more, if you're starting to influence the artist, you're doing it wrong. And I think that's what I want to bring across. Yeah.
Exactly. That's it. You can't, you mustn't inflict your, you can't, well, I'm trying to just give me a second to find the correct words here. You cannot dictate to them dynamically what they should be doing, especially well-seasoned pros. You have to, they know their dynamic. You have to see their style, hear their style, listen to what they're doing and adapt to it. Set your gains to everything, but you can't. We did get a question about inexperienced musicians who will tend to overdo things. They're suddenly on a loud stage. If that is the case, if you have a sound check with him, try explain to them, listen, there's no need to.
Yeah, people will hear you.
People will hear you. Don't worry about it. Just because you're not in the garage anymore doesn't mean that people aren't going to hear you. We will make it as loud as it needs to be. But most musicians have got good dynamic control. And as soon as you start over-compressing them, they will notice. Brass players in particular are very adept at, they can tell when they're hitting a compressor. And you just have to have a degree of trust that they know what they're doing.
Yeah.
If you've got your gain structure correct, your compressor shouldn't be doing that much, especially in monitors. You should just be able to pull them down a few dB at the points where they're really getting out of hand, and that's about it, really. On outputs, I said it. Outputs, I'll set for. I don't really worry about it on wedges, because if it's a decent, again, I'm talking about a decent wedge. If you're going into a high Q wedge, or you're going to a DMB M4 or whatever, those programs and those amps have got great limiting. You shouldn't really be hitting the limiter, but you don't need to compress there. You need to pull the whole mix down, because that's what it's going to do. In ears, though, I will set, like a hard compressor, almost like a limiter at a very high point, just to make sure that you don't, because there's nothing worse than an in-ear transmitter clipping. It's a very obvious, horrible sound, and you do not want that happening live. And sometimes it happens live where the band just don't play as loud as they're going to do during the show. So you've got a gain structure set during sound check, and the guys come out and they're 3-4 dB louder. And you can try, during the course of the show, pull down a mixer dB here, dB there, but you've got to have some level of protection to prevent a hard clip. You can't run the risk of a hard clip during a performance. Because,
don't be reactive, be responsive.
Have something in place to protect yourself and the people listening to it.
Okay, so now let's talk about some of the aspects when you look at these consoles like control groups, VCAs. Are those of any use to you as a monitor engineer?
Yes. So control groups, VCAs, the main ones I would use are, I use a VCA. The main VCA I'll have, and I'll try build into if the console allows it, custom layer. The only VCA I'll really have on the top level will be my ambient microphones for the in-ears, because you can leave, at the end of the song, there's no way you can fade up ambient mics to 8 sets of in-ears in a hurry unless you do it on a VCA. You can dial them all in beforehand to the people's taste, if they want to hear the crowd, if they don't want to hear the crowd. And you have a VCA, and at the end of each song, you just bring that mic, bring those two microphones up, and you can't leave it open. Some people might like that sound, but I tend to, kill it because it just, then you start running the risk of the front of house sound coloring what's happening in the ears and all that kind of stuff. But yes, I'll use a VCA there. I will sometimes use a VCA on effects. If you have, say, a festival setup and you've got 2 or 3 different vocal effects because you don't know who's going to want what, and if you need to kill things in a hurry, say you've got backing singers and a lead vocalist or 2 lead vocalists, you can have a VCA instead of a mute group, or to control the effects between songs, or to push things at certain parts instead of having to go to a different layer. Say your effects return is on a different layer and you have to ride something up, you can have a VCA for a delay, so you can just ride a delay at that point.
Side fills?
I also use... Do I put side fills on a VCA?
Well, if you think about it, do you run side fills like a ad hoc front of house mix where you can use a post fade VCA mix to blend in kit, rhythm section, things like that into the side fills. If you're talking about a festival, you've got one drummer that's really controlled, next drummer's blaring loud. You've got a pretty decent side fill mix going. So with VCAs, you could mix side fills a bit quicker than trying to dial in mixes.
It's not something I do personally. In some ways, to me, in a festival situation, that might even be a bit more complex. It might give you an extra layer of fallibility, something that you could potentially screw up. And so, when it comes to side fills, I like to keep it fairly simple and just, I don't know.
Yeah,
it's not something I'd personally choose.
Yeah, I'm just, because obviously, what you used to get in the analog world is you had like an SM12, or you had a console that was built for monitoring, and you had other consoles built for front of house. These days, almost all consoles, with the amount of buses and stuff available to them, you can run them, whether it's front of house, monitors, recording, broadcast, wherever. In an stereo environment, you'll get away with doing everything on one console. Or this week I'm running wedges on an SXL, next week I'm running front of house on an XXL. But they are definitely, just because they're there doesn't mean you have to use everything. You could run monitors without touching the faders if you're running everything pre-fade. You could run front of house everything on post fade, and run everything via matrices as much as you want, because you've got these days multiple matrices available. So the technology is always there, and I think it's like you were saying, just because there's compressors doesn't mean you have to use them. So if you're on monitor land, I've seen guys put everything on post fade with VCAs for different sections, different stations on stage, where they've got drums, keyboard 1, keyboard 2, guitar left, guitar right, bass right, because you don't know what's coming. But like you said, what you've now done, if you've got a guest engineer that walks in and you've got layers and VCAs hidden away, you can really spoil someone's day,
Exactly. And also something to bear in mind is that not every console manufacturer, I know Soundcraft do have like a VCA in monitor mode. Like
yes.
I don't know, can't remember exactly what they call it, where you can have VCAs just for each aux send. Which in your case, like you said about the side fills, that'd be a handy thing to have. But
Midas
then
does
you
the
get to your
same
next
thing.
show. Yeah, you get to your next show and you get a different console, and you can't do that. So that's one of the reasons I haven't integrated something like that into my workflow, because it's not available on every console. It's not something I look for. I think if it was to become more of a mainstream thing, I think Digico have now incorporated something similar with their nodal mixing, where you can have separate EQs. You can have a different kick drum EQ for each send.
Yeah.
Which is great in theory, but how do you keep track of what you've done in a short space of time?
Yeah.
It's as you're going from mix to mix, you could be going, wow, is that really what they want to hear? Is that it's a tough thing. I mean, technology is changing, but for me, I tend to keep it the VCAs and that kind of thing quite simple. I do a bit of work on matrices. Like I mentioned, I have a spare in-ear send. I separate my side full tops and subs using matrices so that I can have, because some people might they'll go like, oh, well, we want sub on stage, but we're all on in-ears, we don't want side full tops. So, if you've got a software controlled amplifier system where you can mute the tops easily enough, then fine, but sometimes you don't. And also, if you want to have it pre-built into a snapshot for that band, you just have it as tops muted via the matrices, but you're still sending on the same auxes to the side fills. You're just not getting the tops anymore. And I use a similar thing with the drums. I'll have the drum full top and sub separated via matrices. Same mix. So again, if the drummer's on in-ears and he just wants a bit of low end, you can mute the top boxes without having to turn off an amp or something like that. Like I said, the spare in-ear send, that's something I do via the matrices. And yeah, I'm just trying to think if there's anything else that
Well, while you're thinking, I'm going to go through some questions. We've had quite a few good questions that's come through. Me and you discussed. Ace sent us a few questions. I think we've answered the one already. The one question he asked, which was very interesting, he was asking, when you set up front of house and monitor consoles, do you set up and prepare for emergency switchovers? In other words, at front of house, set up your monitoring solutions and all that. I remember in the 90s and on some smaller shows when it was a bit easier, I have done that. Don't do it anymore. My reasoning being the complexity and the expectation from a technology perspective and from an artist perspective has grown to the point where it's very difficult to do that effectively. We often, when we set up shows, if I'm busy programming front of house and we're going to go to a place where I've got, say, for example, running 2 Soundcrafts, we'll grab the front of house file, throw it onto the monitor console, and then build from there because it's labeling's all there, layouts all there. But it won't be a final mix. But no, I've done it before, but these days I've been in situations when a mono console has gone and I've quickly had to patch and get front wedges going so that we can just carry on with the show. But it becomes very complicated. Your thoughts?
Yeah. As a rule, I don't. If I'm out front, I don't set up the console to have a monitor fallback option. I tell you, it eats into your time. First of all, eats into your architecture, what you are using, your infrastructure, sorry, that you are using for front of house. Where I have done it before in the past is when you're working with an artist that, say, for example, you've got your own console, and you know that 3 nights of the week you're going to be doing a club gig, and then that Friday you've got a festival. In which case, if I've had my own console, I've been running 3 sets of in-ears like I used to with Beatenberg. We'd have a console, 3 sets of in-ears, do a club show. They're perfectly happy with it. They've got their mix. We then go into like a drive-in show at a festival. I'll let the people at the festival know that, look, we're bringing our own console. Just please have 3 stereo return lines for us so we can just patch our in-ears on stage. And the guys can then go with an in-ear. Instead of trying to get an in-ear mix dialed in from someone they don't know, they'll get the same mix they've had the last three shows. So in that case, yes, but these days I tend not to, unless also another option is you're doing a corporate and you have to mix, you've got one act appearing and they're like, well, we don't have the budget for 2 consoles. Can you mix monitors from front of house? As long as you know about it. But as a rule, if it's a 2 console gig, no, I don't set up a front of house console to allow for a monitor calamity. But if it was to happen, you could,
make a plan.
Depends on your ability. If you're quick enough, you could do it.
Yeah.
It's
so Ace has got another question here. When on monitor console, running your in-ears like you are now even, do you connect to the headphone amp? Or are you running a wireless pack? Or how do you wire yourself up? If you've got 6 in-ear packs on stage, how do you listen?
Right. When it comes to in-ears, it's the same as wedges. You want to have the same make and model transmitter and receiver as the band have, because there might be tonal differences. There's no point having, if you've got 6 high Qs out in the front edge of stage, there's no point having an Eon as your listen wedge, because it's not going to give you anything like what the high Qs, it's not going to sound anything like the high Qs are out front. It's a similar concept with in-ears. If you've got the whole band on PSM 1000s, you should have a PSM 1000. At worst, a PSM 900, because they're pretty much the same thing, except without dual diversity and networking. You want to get as close to what the band are listening to. And again, this brings us back to the drivers on the in-ears and stuff like that. But you see, like, if you can at least make sure that you have the same chain up until the driver, then at least you're in a bit better position. You can't. I wouldn't run on the headphone amp, firstly, because the headphone amp is a lot more powerful, and you have no way of knowing. The metering is not going to be the same. You've got to know whatever you're listening to level-wise. You've got no way of knowing if that's what the band are listening to out there. You don't know whether you might go, oh, this is really loud, and you're listening at 3, but the guys have got packs that are going into clip or something like that. You need to get the signal chain the same, and for that reason.
So, quick comment on, you spent money on fancy headphones. They're comfortable. You've got to be talking to the crew around you, so you start mixing your in-ears on headphones. It's the same thing, isn't it?
Unfortunately, not.
Oh man. Okay, answer that.
Unfortunately, not. Okay. Yeah, you're full of the good questions tonight, aren't you? Okay. Again, the drivers in a large set of over-ear headphones, those drivers are a lot bigger, and they're going to handle different. They're going to have different SPL, that kind of thing. You also have different kind of isolation, etc. They will give you an idea. Don't get me wrong. They're not going to be like chalk and cheese. There is going to be a similarity in what you're hearing. but you need to get as close to what the band are hearing as possible. So if they're using in-ears, you should try get in-ears as well. But if you don't have a set of in-ears, or you don't have a transmitter, all you've got, say it's been dropped on you at the last second, all you've got is the headphone amp and a set of cans, then go for it. But then just make sure you communicate with the band more, because you need to know, you have to have their feedback. You can't dial up a stunning mix in your set of cans and then tell them they're wrong. You have to make sure that it's a difficult one, but for me, no, you need to try to get your in-ears.
So Michael Isaac made a comment about, because we spoke earlier about you having your macro set up and all that. If you've got a PSM 900 system in Q mode, that's also a good way of getting to a mix and getting a pack out.
It is. I mean, Michael, do you... I know everyone's at home, but Michael just sends in so many damn questions. He's just like here every night listening in, sending in like 6 or 7 questions. No, I'm joking, Michael. I know Michael well. He's a good guy. Q mode. What I like to do with a Q mode pack is I like to have, if you've got a...
well, first of all, explain quickly what that means. Just let everybody understand.
So Q mode, for all those that don't understand, Q mode on a in-ear pack allows you to put all the frequencies of the in-ears into one pack. So say you've got 6 packs, 6 different frequencies. You stick your Q pack in Q mode, and then you sync those same frequencies in, and then you can dial through those frequencies and hear without having to cue on the console. Now, that's a handy function for sound checks and stuff like that, or if you've got an RF tech. I prefer having my Q pack connected to the Q bus so I can listen to anything at any given point. Otherwise, you find yourself fiddling with, on a dark stage, fiddling with a pack to take it out of Q mode to be able to cue something on the console. If you've got an RF tech or a assistant you trust, like a Justin Wilson, Ginger, if you've got someone like that there, you can give him a Q mode pack, and he can have a listen to it and go, tap you on the shoulder and go, I think there's some interference on pack 5. Because remember, your pack not in Q mode will be running on its own frequency. So you will be oblivious to any RF interference on the other packs, unless you're running something like Wireless Workbench, which will go interference, or whatever. But if you're not that lucky, Q mode can help you sort that out. Me personally, I might use it in a sound check to walk the stage quickly. Have all 6 frequencies in one pack instead of having to unplug your in-ears. You can have, just walk the stage quickly. Listen, are my frequencies clear? Fine, yes. But during showtime, I wouldn't use a pack in Q mode. No, I would.
What I've done is I stick to Q mode, and one of the Q mode frequencies I'd scan would be my Q channel, which would have been my normal one, and it will stay in that when I'm in show mode, like you said. But if an artist is saying, I've got problems with my in-ears, your RF tech can run out with a Q mode pack, be on the same frequency, and actually go and listen in situation. And then, because if you're on a different frequency and you've just cued it, you run out and you go, there's no RF issues, yeah? It's not the same thing. You don't know if you're sitting in a null or anything like that. So, good question, Michael. We've already answered Z's question, which was the one you answered about the amateur bands and dealing with those guys. Kanyiso commenting that he's obviously young and missed the whole analog era. He wanted to carry 350 kilo in front of house consoles, obviously. Ben made a comment based on what we spoke about the reverbs. Obviously a lot of sibilants and sounds and transients that are high. People start EQing that out. So we spoke about the high pass and low pass frequencies there. Anton asked, what do you do when a drummer is very loud and you don't have a drum shield? How do you manage your level on stage? So I think that's 2-part. From a front of house guy perspective, if I'm in a small venue, that has a bigger problem than just the stage. It's a spill over everything. If you're running wedges on stage, that becomes a big problem for everybody. If everybody's on ears, they're oblivious to the problem.
It's a good question, but it's not one that's easily answered. if you've got the time, you could ask if you could put up a drum shield or whatever. But normally, in a situation like that where you've got 4 bands playing and the one drummer is completely deaf and just turning his kit into matchsticks, it's a very difficult thing to do. I mean, you can't just sit there and turn the guy down because he's upsetting everyone. The one thing you could try do is pull drums out of all the other wedges. Try isolate him in his own sphere of noise. If he wants kick, snare, and hat deafening out of his wedge, maybe kill it everywhere else and wait for the other musicians to ask you to bring a specific thing back up. Because otherwise, like you mentioned, you're going to upset the front of house engineer. Feel sorry for them. I mean, they might have to get their white gloves dirty and actually turn a knob or something like that.
Okay,
But
I'll take that one. I threw one earlier.
it's a difficult thing. You've got to.
In a church
battle,
in a church scenario, there was a funny joke quite a few weeks ago that the only people surviving the coronavirus are all the church drummers in their little fish tanks.
Yes. They've been isolating for years.
Yes. And in an installed environment like that, if you're running a theater show or something like that, there's no question. I mean, your music director, everybody's going to jump in and help assist the problem. And if it's really bad, they'll get another drummer. But in a church, these days with a lot of the visual and the cameras, some drum shields are ugly. They're not set up right. They're not kept right. They clean them with window lean, which is like basically water sandpaper, which is ridiculous.
Clean them with window lean and a scourer, yes. So they end up with that.
So it's
fuzzy,
a
like
catch-22.
Vaseline all over.
So in a church scenario, you do get some really good ones. I mean, the Clear Sonics work great. The one thing that people get wrong is they try and put them nice and curvy so it looks great, but what they don't realize is they're building a parabolic. So it sounds horrible inside there. I tend to concertina it as much as I possibly can to completely diffract anything that's happening inside there and try and not end up with a flat screen in front of the kick drum. I'd have a join there and I'd have an angle so I don't get all that, because you can actually get phasing problems quite drastically within your kick drum sound and all that kind of stuff. So not everybody understands these things, but it comes with experience as well.
I think you're talking about a control, like theaters, etc., churches, controlled environments, where something like that is a known possibility. Small clubs, festivals, it's not,
it's not necessarily a problem because you're ending up at 110 dB front of house anyway. So.
But a small club with a tiny PA, it's the only way you can really help is to try. I mean, if you have a chance to chat to the drummer and get him to see the error in his ways.
I can throw an example in there.
Tough.
We do catsies a lot with Blue Bamboo, and our original drummer is Neil Ettridge, moved to the UK. We would start catsies. We would have the background sets. The the dance floor would be empty. I would literally go to him pre-show because I tried drum shields initially. It looked ugly. It was bulky. There's not enough space on the roof in the room. Band were on wedges. He was on ears. But then I went to him and I asked him, which is a no-no, I know, and we discussed this, that for the first 2-3 songs, he can keep an eye on the dance floor. If the dance floor is empty, he'd either pull out an ear or play with his blast sticks, and he would pull back on stuff like snare and cymbals, because I'm sitting in a room, I've got this empty floor, and the drums are just coming at everybody, and I'm trying to get a ballad balance on the PA. So there was a back and forth conversation. And then he would look at me sometimes because we've had the conversation and go, between songs, is that okay? And I said, the minute there's 10 people on the dance floor, go for it, because that's already enough diffusion. And then 5 minutes later, the dance floor is full. And then by the end of the night, I'm pushing kit as much as I can because the room's completely changed. So it's a back and forth. And there is, on a festival, the size.
Again, that's with a, with a drummer, where you can have that conversation. Small club, 4-band changeovers, no sound checks. It's a much tougher conversation to have, especially with people playing small clubs might not be as experienced. But unfortunately, Sorry if it was Anton. Yeah. Unfortunately, there's no one magic. There's no one silver bullet for that question. I'm
Where's
afraid.
that button on the desk? I think it's the button. Isn't it just next to the talent button?
Next to the DFA fader.
Yes.
Yeah. The one you give the corporate. Yes, you give that when someone comes up and I'm this person's girlfriend. Yeah, that's his fader there. Yeah, that one.
Anyway,
The
yeah,
DFA.
yeah.
I won't explain what it means right now. There's children listening.
The ID10.
I just want to actually. Could I just touch
era.
on something? Could I just touch on something that you mentioned about with the drum screens and phasing? Something again coming back to workflow and how you do things on a console. What I notice a lot of people doing is the phase reverse button between kick in, kick out, snare top, snare bottom, and it's something people have, new engineers have picked up. They follow. They've learned from someone. Oh, try phase reversing and everything like that. Where that came about is from the old analog consoles, and you'll be familiar with this. There's no individual delay per channel. So what people have been doing, two sources, different mic distances, you get obviously phase cancellation between the two. So what people were doing, flicking the phase switch.
I find the better of the two
It's
evils.
it's always at best been a compromise. It's never actually been a good solution to the problem. You want a mic you want the kick in for some attack, and you want the kick out for some low end. People flip one out phase, try EQ it as best to get. These days, what I would like people to try to do more of is experiment with delays, because on each channel you now have independent delay. So here's a tip for some of the upcoming engineers. Just scientifically, sound travels around 340 meters a second. So when you do the maths and work backwards, that's about 340 millimeters a millisecond. So if you look at the distance between a 91 on the inside and a 52 on the outside, there's no point using a phase reverse button to make one. I mean, what's the wavelength at 50 hertz? I mean, it's going to be
8 meters.
8 meters. So a mic that's at most half a meter apart, and you now sticking a waveform 8 meters out or 7.5 meters, it doesn't work. Try start with 1 millisecond of delay on your kick in instead of just flipping the phase each time, and work from there. Shorten it, lengthen it, see what happens. It's a much safer, more clinical way of getting the two sources in phase than just phase reversing one or the other. You can use a similar process on the snare bottom.
Yeah.
I wouldn't.
Yeah, it's not. Some people think, well, one's at the top, one's at the bottom. Obviously, it's out of phase. Not necessarily. I mean, there's a lot of things happening in that space.
Well, exactly. They are both capturing a separate skin.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, it's the spill between them that will be giving you some phase issues. But again, there's
Yeah.
I think.
But you have to be listening.
with
It's listening as well.
Yeah.
I mean, guys, and that goes with guitar mics. And if you're running two guitar mics on an amp, same thing. I mean, stereo guys have been doing this for years. We now can do it in real time using the input delays. Katlejo's asking, which mic do you prefer on horns for clip-ons? Look, there's some really good mics out there. I personally love the warmth of a 350, but it's also not the most consistent in positioning. It's got a little bit of a flimsy clip on it. A Beta 98 with the H clamp on it stays very constant in position, so that's from a continuity point of view, that works well. DPA, great sounding mic all round. A bit open, depending if I'm on a very lively stage, it's a bit too much. I prefer the 98 separation. In between the two, a 350 will come in. A DPA, if I'm doing a solo artist out front, would probably be my preference. You just need to make sure that you it's a newer one with a fresh pop filter because it uses the pop filter as part of its clamping system and all that kind of stuff to hold the mic. And then there's some other custom mics out there. There's options, but the thing is, you have to apply thought to it and what the context is. If I'm sitting with a brass section within a rhythm section, very tight, I'd go for a 98. It's more controlled, it's more precise. I've got continuity going. When the guy takes the clip off and put the clip back on, chance of the mic actually having moved is little because of the construction of the mic. That's my thought. What do you say?
I've got no. Again, when it comes to mixing monitors, it all comes down to what the show calls for and what the front of house guy's preference is. I think all those clip-on mics you mentioned are great. The DPAs, the 98s, they're all fantastic mics. I mean, like we mentioned earlier, these manufacturers put a lot of R&D into these microphones, so they're not going to put out something that sounds terrible. What I would say is that if you've got a big band situation, and you can do away with a mic that's attached to, so that the guys have got more control of. This comes back to dynamics of the players.
Yeah,
really good brass players. I mean, some of the brass players that are out there are phenomenal. If you put a mic on a stand in front of them, they know exactly where to be.
At what note.
They can control it. You eliminate their ability to control their dynamics by having a mic clipped on.
Yeah.
The other thing as well, sometimes with a trumpet, they want to put the mute on it, and you can't do that with a clip-on in the way. So in that sort of situation, if you've got a big band, Sennheiser MD41 for me, you can't really beat it. A 58 will do great.
112 on the trombones.
I tend not to go with an SM57 on brass. Something to do with the again the sort of raspiness, the reed on a brass instrument with no pop shield or any form of pop, no form of filtering to stop it. It just gets, to me, it can get a bit raspy quickly.
Yeah.
So I prefer like the 421 and the 98, but there's no preference.
My favorite brass mic at the moment, and I've got quite a few of them. I use them for a lot of stuff, but on brass, for example, the Audio-Technica 450, which is a side angle pencil mic. Sidney Mavundla uses that for his jazz gigs. He actually bought one from me because we used it on I think I gave it to him. Used it on a gig, and he realized that the amount of freedom it gives him as a jazz player, and he can hear the tonal differences as he's moving on and off the microphone. He fell in love with the mic, And for a guy that can do that, I'll put that mic on him before I put any other clip on him. But these days, with the kind of shows we're doing, and the guys have got to walk around, move around, and all that. If you think about Brendan Ross prefers, he's got a Beta 98, but he walks around. He's a feature artist. You can't really put him on a stand because of the way that he has to function. But if you watch him play, he'll play, and if you've watched a trumpeter play and change intonation on tubing, slides and all that kind of stuff, you watch Brendan Ross, he'll play on the mic and he'll immediately adjust the microphone, because he's listening to what he's doing, and he'll be changing because he's a tone that he wants out of his instrument. And he's got his soprano or his tenor, he'll clip on, he'll check, he'll be very pedantic on the position, play, and then as much as adjusting his intonation, he's adjusting the mic position. And I love seeing that, because it means he's listening, and he understands the relationship between the two. So that's a great.
So exactly,
element.
And you come back to now where how do you tell someone that's got that good an ear? They know what they want to hear. They're listening to it. How are you going to go tell them, no, you can't have any reverb, or no, you can't do this? You see, you've got to deal with what's in front of you. If you've got a great musician, listen to them. If they want something, give it to them.
So I'm going to ask you to.
Nishan's, I just saw Nishan ask the question.
Okay,
It'll be a quick answer. I promise. I won't ramble on about it too much.
Aww.
I like to get my ramble on, my Led Zeppelin. But how's it, Nishan? How you doing? What's your feeling about time aligning side fills and monitors on big stages? I do it all the time. It can really help tighten up a stage, because if you can eliminate all the slight, like a few milliseconds of latency from each wedge, adding to the ambient noise on stage. If you could, it really helps cleaning up everything. You shouldn't be more than a few milliseconds. You keep what I do is I keep my side fills at 0. That is my timing source because it's the furthest away. And what I'll normally do is I'll time align it to the main wedges. But what I would recommend to people, what some people forget to do, is to add. You've got your side fills here, and then you've got your, so that's at 0. And then they work out the delay. Say they work on the distance. They go, it's 5 meters to either side. So they dial in 5 meters of delay to the center wedges. But what they've forgotten to take out is the fact that someone singing in front of those wedges is probably, if you put a mic stand up, 1.5 to 1.8 meters away.
Yeah.
So you need to split that difference. You need to make sure you don't over delay. You don't over delay the front wedges, because then it's an audible latency. The artist will notice it. So you've just got to remember to keep that, add the distance.
It's the same when you do PA design. If you draw in a venue, you're not drawing the floor. You're drawing the ear floor. So if it's a standing crowd, your floor is literally 1.8 meters average, because that's where you want to focus your sound. You've got to take the human bias element into it. What I want you to do, you can see there, we need to announce our winner tonight. We actually got this message about 10 minutes into the chat. Remember, we're running the competition with our sponsors from Shure. Thank you very much to Darren and Gary and the guys and Anton that's been helping us. Our winner tonight, and I'm going to let Simon say his name.
Okay, congratulations. The winner of the MV88 is Temba Ngwenya.
Temba Ngwenya.
Is he related? Is he Temba, are you related to Fats at all? Probably not. I've got a Reginald Ngwenya as one of my friends. Work with him quite often. Just wondering. Congratulations.
The only thing is, I don't think it's the MV88 tonight, if I remember correctly.
Oh, sorry.
I'm using the MV88 tonight. That's why it's in the chat. It's the MV5. MV5. Yeah, so there's different ones in the range.
Sorry, sucks to be you.
No.
Sucks to be you. You haven't won an MV88. You've won an MV5.
Which is brilliant.
It's a terrible thing.
And then, so Johan will be in contact with you with Anton from Waldemar, and we'll get that mic to you. If we can't get hold of you, I'll give it to Simon. So you can get rid of that old talkback mic of his.
Hey, leave my phone alone. This has been in the trenches with me.
Yes. I have a little talkback mic. It's a little Bayer dynamic capsule mic. It's about that big. It fits into any XLR socket. I've had it since 1993. It's still in my bag today. And it still works. It's great. Stick it on any console. Just stick it in there and talk. It's the last resort.
This is one of the first things out the toolbox.
Have you sanitized that recently?
Oh God, no, because I don't let anyone else use it. It's mine.
There we go.
If you want to use my microphone, you run the risk of contracting an extremely bad attitude. So.
I think our questions have stopped coming through. We've gone for about an hour and 20 minutes. I've really enjoyed our chat tonight. We got some really practical stuff done. Anything you want to add that we didn't ask you that you were thinking about? Obviously within monitoring consoles, as young engineers coming up, or guys that want to focus on being a monitor engineer, what are some of the things they can develop or focus on? Do you need a moment?
We've said quite a lot, but again, we could talk about monitoring for weeks and weeks and weeks. It's a tough thing to get into. It's a very pressure heavy situation to be in, especially on a gig that's got a high turnaround. A lot of artists appearing, a lot of people all looking at you going, we want this, we want that. I think finding a workflow that works for you and being careful. Don't overcompress. Use, know your gear. Learn what I touched on it earlier, what the frequency ranges of the mics are that you use. understand the proximity effect. Quick example, you've got a Beta-52. You put a Beta-52 on kick out, you put it on, say, floor tom, and you put it on bass guitar. All right? And when you go look at the specs for that mic, you'll see that at 0.5 meter, there's no proximity effect. So it's fine on kick out. You put it on a floor tom, and it's a lot closer to the skin. It's got about 6 dB of boost at the very low end. Put it on a bass guitar, so it's about 3-4 centimeters from the driver. You've got about 10 dB of proximity effect. So you have to understand that kind of, you have to understand the gear you're using, because if you don't get your low pass filtering right, you don't get your gating right. An example, you put the floor tom, you put the Beta-52 on the floor tom, and you set the high pass filter at 30 hertz. But now you've got the drummer now has a sub behind him. And, he hits the kick drum and the whole kit just takes off, starts rumbling.
Yeah.
And straight away, everyone's going to go straight to the kick drum and go like, why is it feeding back? It wasn't doing this earlier. It's like, well, no, what's happening is the proximity effect on that floor tom mic, the level out the wedges is opening the gate on the floor tom mic. And the floor tom mic is only high pass to 30 hertz. You've got to understand things like that. You've got to make sure that you know your gear. Raise that high pass filter. Just because you can't hear it. If you're listening to a wedge, it's only got a response from 50 hertz to 16 kilohertz. Just because you can't hear certain frequencies doesn't mean they aren't there.
Yeah.
Digital consoles, whatever you are putting into them, they are putting out. Just because you can't hear it doesn't mean it's not there. They will be, if you are sending a source that's 20 hertz all the way up to 20K, you can be rest assured that that console is processing that dynamic range and putting it all out. So just remember that. If you can't hear things, doesn't mean they're not there. You've got to be very clued up on what you do. Get your low pass filtering and high pass filtering right. Don't think, oh, should I really do this? Try it.
Yeah.
Put a low pass filter on the brass players. Put a low pass filter on guitars. All that will give the vocals more room to cut through. So you won't have a vocalist doing this all the time, because the HF will be less cluttered. There'll be more clarity. That mic will be able to cut through more because there'll be a lot more space for it to move. Don't overcompress. Remember that in sound checks, people are going to play about 3 dB on average softer than they are in the show. So allow yourself some headroom.
Space.
Allow, give yourself somewhere to go.
Yeah.
Don't over EQ. Here's something that I kind of got it wrong when on our last chat. The whole what do you want to call it? Squeaking out, using
ringing out. Yeah, I wasn't going to bring that up if you didn't.
Ringing out. So for everyone that's not familiar with it, what this is turning the microphone up until it starts feeding back and then cutting that frequency, which is great in a corporate environment when you've got a lectern mic and you're at front of house and you don't know if the person's going to be, the microphone's here, you don't know if the person's going to be this tall, that tall, stand this far away, or be on it. You want to know where you can push that mic gain to without it feeding back. So you turn the mic up in the PA and you cut the frequencies so you know that if you have that situation, you can push it in the PA. Now, I'm talking about mainly in a music situation, not a corporate one. That is the absolute wrong way to EQ wedges. If you're doing that on stage to EQ your wedges, you're doing it very, very wrong. Like I said, a corporate situation where you've got to do a little bit of foldback for the person speaking is about the only situation that you should really do that. You need to get your lead vocal and listen to it through those wedges, not just through your Q wedge. Your Q wedges are right for setting a level, for getting a gain point, setting your compressor threshold. Then you need to get out there and hear what those wedges are doing and make cuts based on that. Putting a mic on a stand in front of some wedges and side fills and turning it up till it feeds back it's not going to help you, because first of all, you're going to have to probably push an unrealistic gain. There's no way you'd probably dial the gain up that high in that situation. You've got no way of knowing that those frequencies are definitely going to go if you get to that situation. Because if you've got someone who's on the mic, you've got someone who's here, you need to have a point you can go to. So you need to understand, you need to know that. Another thing to bear in mind is that EQing with no one in front of the mic like this, everyone has got different. Something like the sinus cavity can play a role even. That the way someone holds the mic, someone's sinus cavity can affect the shape of their face. Whether they have glasses or whether they wear a hat is going to affect your EQ. And putting a mic on a stand and turning it up till it feeds back is not going to teach you. It's not going to tell you any of that. The only way you're going to know is when someone walks out there and does it. That's why we have sound checks. But
yeah.
Well, hopefully I covered your ringing out question a bit better this time.
It's just because what it does is if you ring out, if you're in an open environment, your ambience of your stage, for example, and you're doing what Simon is talking about, you'll get 1K sticks its head out. You tap off 1K, then you'll get 2K, then you might get 3K before you get 500, because your low frequencies take a lot more energy to feed than high frequencies do. They spike quite quickly. So what you end up doing is you're killing your high mids and your high frequencies, which is taking away all the definition out of a wedge, especially if you're doing it on your graphic EQ. And then you're left with all this low-end energy, and then a vocalist come up, and then the first thing you do on him, he goes, I need a bit more edge. And you turn the high frequencies up on his channel, and you're counteracting what you've just done. But what you're doing is, if you use the graphic EQ, it's comb filtering that you've done, because it's a bunch of little comb filters, and you're trying with a parametric EQ to counteract that. So you're getting this really ugly EQ going, which you think you're doing, but what's coming out of that box then is so unproductive, and there's no dynamic life to it. So a vocalist is then within his right to say this sounds horrible, or he's okay now, but when the band comes in, there's no dynamic in the definition parts, which means the song finishes, it's blaring loud on stage, and the first thing he says, I can't hear anything. And you think, well, this oak's an idiot, he's deaf. But you've done it. You've caused that problem. So, you want a flat, proper response. You want your wedge to sound. There's no reason your wedges shouldn't sound amazing. Like you're tuning your PA, tune your wedges, but same thing Simon says, you need to know what your situation is. So get the microphone in your hand, go stand there, you talk, you listen, get your gain structure set right. When the musician's there, you listen to it, and you work with that scenario on that individual basis of that mic. That means when you're dialing in the drum kit for him, you're dialing in the keyboards for him, he's hearing full spectrum, it sounds amazing, and you can treat the microphone if there are any situations. And most of the time, you don't have an issue with the mic if the guy's using it properly. So I'm quite passionate about that, because I've seen guys get this wrong big time.
We did discuss it off air a bit. You could use ringing out in that manner as a secondary process, whereby, say you've got 3 BVs sharing a wedge, and you've taken each mic and you've set a gain and you've listened to it. Yeah, maybe you could put all 3 up in front of their pair of wedges, and because BVs are always going to want more themselves, they're always going to be louder than the next one, and you've got to know where you can go to. But to use ringing out in that process, in as you alluded to, as you described this the first time, is completely wrong. You've got to hear what that mic is doing in respective wedges and make an educated guess based on what you hear.
Yeah.
And then maybe you use the ringing out as a secondary process. Like I said, for some things, say you've got a choir coming on stage, and the lead vocalist says, "Oh, I've got to have the choir in the wedges." Not ideal, but if that's the case, then, you've got some large diaphragm condensers set up, open them all up, put them in the wedge, see what starts to go.
But in that case, this is where your group scenario comes in greatly, because I would rather stick those in a group, do that manipulation on that group for those microphones into that context.
Yes, exactly.
Rather than hacking away at the monitor.
Exactly. We wouldn't be EQing the monitor. We wouldn't be using the graphic at this point. At this point, at that point, we'd be using either the channel strip. In the case of the BVs, we might be making tweaks on the individual mic's EQs. If we go like, oh, this mic is a bit starting to go around here, cut it there. A choir, yes, put them in a group, use the group or something like that. But
I think you've said it 6 times now. You have to listen. Our ears are the most valuable tool.
Never use it as your primary EQing method. Sorry if I've offended anyone. But
oh, no, please. I think I've done that more than you. But at the end of the day as well, I mean, there's a reason. You can see me getting quite animated about it, and you can hear Simon on his things. I'm 28. I've done this for about 2 years now. I've done it wrong. I've done it right.
Liar.
Okay, I'm 29.
Some of your kids are 28, aren't they?
No, 25. Anyway, you called me old earlier and I overlooked it. Don't step over the line now.
I've got the matching grey here.
Yeah, we're getting there. It's time for I need a haircut. This lockdown's ridiculous. So, in a nutshell, I think, if anything, what we've illustrated tonight is there's a lot of uniqueness. There's a different approach, but I think what you guys can appreciate is everything that Simon's explained, he reasons into it. And I've said this, if you tell me why you're doing something, I'm much more likely to listen and pay attention to you, because there's definition and there's reason behind it. If you're doing something because you read in a magazine, someone said you should try this, or someone said you must do this, or like you said with the phase switch, you just hit it because it's the bottom snare, you have to. That means you've not put in thought into it. So if you are doing some stuff just out of habit, you're the only guy that's going to know that, number one. But start changing your habits. Start putting in. If you're doing the same thing that you've always done, I mean, when I walk up to a console where I'm doing monitors front of house or broadcast or whatever, I'm always implementing new things in my own workflow, trying different things. If there's new mics, I listen to it differently. If I've got a new mic, for example, on a snare, I'll still put the old one on and put the new one next to it. Sacrifice a new channel, have a listen. If I can't get it right, I'll stick to the old one. And we learn and we keep developing. But at the end of the day, you have to listen. You have to know why you're doing stuff. There has to be reasoning behind everything. Even picking a console. If you're picking a console, if you said, you're doing a gig, what console would you like? Just picking the latest and the greatest on the market because it obviously has to be good doesn't mean you're going to do a good job. I mean, I'd rather pick something I know very well, that I know that I can go into a situation, I've got a time crunch, and I'm going to have no issue getting that console going in no time at all. And if it's not the latest and greatest, doesn't have to be. I can still deliver. People in the audience don't sit there and go, "Oh, I can hear this guy's using that new plugin. Okay, that's good." Or, "Oh, he's hit the phase switch. He's not done a delay on the on the mic." People don't listen they listen to the outcome, to the result. And if you can achieve that with the tools that you put in front of you, that means when you're traveling around and you've got compromised tools or situations, you can deliver because you have a plan of action, you have a workflow, and you've got a reasoning in your head. And that's what it comes down to. That's my closing words. See, you got a love letter from Duncan Riley there. He loves you a lot.
I was going to say, Duncan, I don't know how many times I have to tell you this. I'm happily married. I think the world of you two, but please, no more of this public affection. It's.
Yeah.
No, I'm kidding. Thank you, Duncan. Duncan is one of the nicest guys in our industry.
Yeah, I think he's probably one. He's in the top 5, at least, even though he's a lampy.
Is he? Oh yeah, of course he's a
lampy.
I forgot about that.
Yeah.
He's definitely my top lampy then.
Yes. Yeah. Thanks, Simon. Thanks for joining. I'm going to think of another topic to bring in. Can you do a workshop in buying consoles? Yeah, if you pay for them. There's a question we just got in from Mpo. I do actually I've got some thoughts on that. I've obviously deal with a lot of youngsters, a lot of young companies and guys that I mentor that ask, what console should I buy? I look at if you're looking at from a company's perspective or from a band's perspective, if a band's going to go on tour, there's different criteria in all the ways. You can look at everything from travel to weight to, my first point is if you can afford not to buy, don't buy. Because if you need to do it with a band that's traveling, rather do the homework, send out your riders properly, set your riders up properly, have your show files, and save money, and make sure that you go around the country with the consoles that you can get. If the band says money's not an issue, we want to buy something to travel with, there's got to be some criteria you've got to follow there. If it's for an installation, for a church, there's a lot of criteria. So I think I'll definitely do something on that. There's some good discussion choice.
Rider friendliness. If you're a company and you're going to be doing dry highs, rentability, there's no point buying a console that nobody wants to use. Well, no one else is asking for.
Exactly.
You could buy an all-singing dancing console, but if no one else wants to hire it from you, then it's just going to sit and not earn you any money.
Yeah, you have to be relevant to your market. In churches, churches have a lot of volunteers. Schools have a lot of volunteers. So you can't have overcomplicated consoles. And there's some really easy, user-friendly consoles that are great sounding, great options on them. But that's another workshop. So thanks for that comment, Mpo. From my side, congratulations to, I forgot your name, Atemba, on winning the MV5. We'll get in contact with you. We're going to do another giveaway next week. Keep watching our Facebook page for what and when that'll be. And then I'm going to come up with some excuse to invite Simon back. He's a great chatting companion.
Liar.
What? If you don't want to come back,
You
just say so.
You couldn't find anyone else.
That's true. No one was available. Bottom of the barrel. But thank you for that. I really appreciate it. I enjoyed this chat. I hope you guys did. Thanks for watching our channel. Keep checking into our YouTube channel and subscribing. We'll get some good stuff going. And then we'll see you on Tuesday with our next one at 8 o'clock. Thank you.